I never thought one dance could change my life. I wasn't dressed to impress. I wasn't even supposed to be there. But when his hand reached for mine and his eyes locked on me, the music faded. That billionaire's slow song wasn't just a dance, it was destiny. Before I share how a single slow song stole my heart, don't forget to hit subscribe and like this video. Share it with anyone who believes love shows up when you least expect it. I've never been the kind of woman who belongs at fancy parties. My life has always been simple: work, home, a little time for myself, and maybe a coffee shop visit here and there when I needed to escape the routine. Luxury wasn't something I chased. In fact, I used to roll my eyes whenever I saw people spending ridiculous amounts of money on gowns or designer shoes. That wasn't me, and I was okay with it. So when my best friend begged me to come with her to this ballroom event, my first instinct was to say no. I mean, what would I even do there? I didn't own a glittering dress or sky-high heels. My wardrobe was mostly made up of office wear, comfortable flats, and a few dresses that were better suited for Sunday brunch than an evening gala. I told her I'd just feel out of place, but she wasn't hearing it. "You need to live a little," she said, her eyes sparkling with mischief. "Come on, it'll be fun. You don't even have to dance. Just stand next to me and sip something fancy. Pretend if you have to." And somehow, against my better judgment, I gave in. Maybe it was the way she begged, or maybe deep down, I was tired of always saying no to things that scared me. That's how I found myself standing in front of the grand double doors of a ballroom that looked like something out of a movie. The chandeliers inside sparkled like falling stars. The music floated through the air, and every single person walking in looked like they had just stepped out of a magazine. My heart was pounding before I even crossed the threshold. I tugged at my dress, one of the only decent ones I owned. It was simple, black, nothing flashy. My shoes were plain, and I wore minimal jewelry. Compared to the women gliding past me in sequins and gowns that shimmered under the lights, I felt invisible. Or maybe worse, I felt like I didn't belong. Walking in, I tried to stick close to my friend, but she was in her element, greeting people she somehow already knew, laughing, blending right in. Meanwhile, I stood awkwardly near the edges of the room, clutching a glass of sparkling water like it was a shield. My eyes scanned the room, and all I could think about was how badly I wanted to disappear. I kept telling myself no one was paying attention to me, that I could just melt into the background until it was over. But the truth was, my nerves were screaming louder than the orchestra. I felt like an imposter, like a girl who had wandered into a world she wasn't meant to see. And in that moment, I promised myself one thing: I wasn't going to dance. Not tonight, not here, not with anyone. I would just survive the night quietly and go back to my ordinary life in the morning. But life has a funny way of ignoring promises like that. I was standing there, trying to pretend I was invisible, when the atmosphere of the room suddenly shifted. It's strange how you can feel energy change before you even know why. The music hadn't changed, the chandeliers were still glowing, and yet there was this hum, this ripple moving through the crowd, pulling my attention forward. That's when I saw him. He didn't come in with an announcement, no fanfare, no dramatic entrance like the characters you see in movies. But the room noticed. People straightened, turned their heads, whispers floated across the air like feathers. And even though I tried not to care, my eyes followed theirs. He walked in calmly, like he had nothing to prove, and yet somehow everything about him commanded attention. His suit wasn't loud or flashy, but it was tailored so perfectly that it spoke louder than any diamond in the room. His stride was unhurried, confident, the kind of walk that came from years of knowing exactly who you were and never needing to explain it. I remember the way my stomach tightened when I realized who he was. Everyone in the city knew his name, the billionaire businessman who owned more hotels, clubs, and luxury resorts than anyone could count. I had seen him in magazines, always photographed beside models or stepping out of private jets. To me, he had always been a world away, like a constellation in the night sky, beautiful, distant, unreachable. And yet, here he was, in the same room, breathing the same air as me. I quickly looked away, embarrassed at myself for staring. He wasn't for me. Men like him were surrounded by women who were everything I wasn't: flawless, polished, dripping in confidence and designer perfume. I told myself to stop being foolish, but curiosity has its own gravity. No matter how much I told myself not to, my eyes kept drifting back. He was making his way through the room, stopping to greet a few people, shaking hands with men who looked powerful but suddenly seemed smaller in his presence. And the women? Oh, the women. Their smiles widened, their eyes sparkled, their laughter grew softer and sweeter when he walked by. They leaned toward him as if his attention was oxygen, and they were desperate to breathe it in. I felt a pang of something I didn't want to name. Jealousy, maybe. But I pushed it down. Why should it matter to me? He wasn't looking at me. He hadn't even noticed me. I was just a shadow at the edge of the room. A girl in a plain black dress clutching a glass of water like a lifeline. Still, something about him unsettled me. It wasn't just his wealth or his reputation. It was the way he carried himself, the way he seemed to belong everywhere while making everyone else question if they belonged at all. He was magnetic, and people couldn't help but orbit around him. At one point, I caught him laughing softly at something an older gentleman said, and it startled me how genuine it sounded. It wasn't the practiced smile I'd seen in glossy magazine spreads. It was real, deep, warm, and for a heartbeat, I wondered what it might feel like to be the reason for that kind of laughter. I scolded myself immediately. Stop. Don't go there. That wasn't my story. I was just a bystander, a nobody in his world. And yet, standing there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about this night was different. That maybe, just maybe, I hadn't seen the last of him. So I stayed at the edge, pretending to blend into the wallpaper, while secretly hoping I'd catch one more glimpse of him. My heart whispered what my mind refused to believe: that sometimes even constellations look down and notice the quiet ones staring up. The music shifted, almost like the orchestra itself had read the room. The upbeat chatter of violins slowed into something softer, deeper, the kind of melody that made couples instinctively draw closer. I felt my chest tighten because I knew what was coming next. A slow dance. I told myself it didn't matter. I wasn't here to dance. I was here to keep my friend company, to stand at the edge of the room like a polite wallflower, and then go home. I took a sip of my water, pretending to be fascinated by the way the bubbles clung to the sides of the glass. But the sound of footsteps stopped me, heavy, steady, purposeful, moving in my direction. I kept my eyes down, convincing myself it was just someone heading to the bar, maybe passing by me. That's when a shadow fell across me, and a hand, steady and open, extended into my view. May I? For a second, I didn't even process that the voice was speaking to me. I looked up slowly, and my heart nearly dropped into my shoes. It was him, the billionaire, the man everyone in the room had been orbiting like planets around the sun. And here he was, standing right in front of me, his hand waiting for mine. I froze. My first instinct was to laugh nervously, to glance over my shoulder, convinced he must have been addressing someone else. Maybe a woman standing behind me, someone more fitting, someone who looked like she belonged here. But there was no one else. His eyes were locked on me, steady, patient, like he had all the time in the world. I don't dance, I stammered, my voice catching in my throat. The corner of his mouth lifted in the faintest smile, not mocking, just gentle. That's all right. One song won't hurt. Everything inside me screamed to say no. My shoes weren't made for dancing. My steps were clumsy, my nerves on fire. I imagined myself tripping, making a fool of myself in front of everyone. But there was something in the way he asked. Not commanding, not entitled, but almost hopeful. Like he wasn't just offering me a dance, but asking me to trust him for a moment. My hand trembled as I placed it in his. His fingers wrapped around mine, warm and grounding, and before I could rethink it, he was leading me onto the floor. I felt every eye in the room follow us, and the weight of their stares burned against my skin. I wanted to disappear, to shrink into nothing, but he leaned close enough for me to hear him above the music. Don't look at them, just look at me. I did, and suddenly the room faded. The chandeliers, the whispers, the jealous glances, they all blurred into background noise. All I could focus on was the sound of the music, the rhythm of our steps, and the steady calm of his gaze. My body was stiff at first, resisting, but his touch was steady, guiding me effortlessly through the motions. It was like he had built a world where only the two of us existed, and for the first time that night, I didn't feel out of place. Something shifted inside me as we moved. My fear melted into a quiet awe, and I realized this wasn't just a dance. It was an invitation into a moment I never expected. An invitation to be seen, not for what I lacked, but for who I was. And as the music carried us across the floor, I couldn't help but wonder if this one slow song was about to change everything. The moment his hand settled at my waist, my breath caught. I wasn't used to being this close to anyone, let alone a man who felt like he belonged to a different universe. My other hand rested awkwardly against his shoulder, and I could feel the solid strength beneath his suit. Everything about him radiated calm confidence, while I stood there stiff as a board, praying I wouldn't trip over my own feet. The music swelled, wrapping around us like a cocoon. At first, I was hyper-aware of every single movement. My steps were too short, my timing slightly off, my shoulders tense. But then I felt the gentle pressure of his hand, guiding me. Not pushing, not controlling, just steadying. His touch was reassuring, almost like he was silently saying, "You're safe here. Just follow me." I let out a shaky breath, and little by little, my body started to relax. The awkward rhythm of my steps softened, and suddenly we were gliding. The floor didn't feel so intimidating anymore, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged in the middle of a ballroom. He leaned down slightly, his voice low, meant only for me. "See? You're doing better than you think." I laughed nervously, shaking my head. "I think you're just making me look good." He chuckled, a warm sound that seemed to seep straight into my chest. "I don't have that much power. You're doing this on your own." Those words, simple as they were, meant more to me than he probably realized. For so long, I'd been the kind of woman who faded into the background, the one people overlooked in crowded rooms. Yet here I was, in the arms of a man who could have chosen anyone, and he was telling me that I wasn't invisible, that I was enough. The music carried us, and our small talk turned into gentle laughter. We spoke about little things, how I didn't even want to come tonight, how he secretly hated these events even though he hosted half of them, how much easier it was to talk when you weren't surrounded by people trying to impress you. Somewhere in the middle of that conversation, I forgot to be nervous. I forgot the eyes watching us, the whispers I imagined in the corners of the room. All I could feel was the rhythm of the song, his hand holding mine, and the steady heartbeat of a man who, against all odds, had chosen me to dance with. I didn't know where this moment would lead. I didn't know if it was just a dance or if it was the beginning of something more. But what I did know was that for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. And it all started with one slow song. As the song carried us along, I felt something shift between us. It wasn't just the rhythm or the way his hand guided mine, it was in his eyes. They weren't darting around the room, searching for someone else to impress. They were locked on me, steady, almost as if he was memorizing every detail of my face. I didn't know what to do with that kind of attention. It made me feel both exposed and cherished at the same time. I tried to look away, to let my gaze wander over the chandeliers or the polished floor, but somehow I kept getting pulled back to him. You know, he said softly, leaning just close enough that I could hear him over the music. I noticed you the moment you walked in. I blinked, taken aback. Me? The word slipped out before I could stop it, filled with disbelief. He smiled, just the faintest curve of his lips, but there was something so sincere in it. Yes, you. You looked different. Everyone else in this room came here to be seen. You didn't. And that's what caught me. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I wanted to argue, to tell him he must have been mistaken, that there was nothing special about me. But the way he said it, the calm certainty in his voice, made it hard to dismiss. I laughed nervously, shaking my head. I wasn't trying to stand out. Honestly, I didn't even want to come tonight. My friend dragged me here. That makes sense, he said with a small chuckle. You carry yourself like someone who doesn't need a crowd's approval. That's rare in places like this. His words settled in me like warm light. For so long, I'd thought my quietness, my tendency to fade into the background, made me less. Yet here was a man who lived in the center of attention, telling me that was exactly what drew him in. I found myself loosening, smiling in a way I hadn't since stepping into the ballroom. Well, I guess you're right about one thing. I definitely wasn't looking to be noticed. He tilted his head, his gaze never wavering. And that's why I couldn't look away. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. It felt surreal, hearing words like that from someone like him. But beyond the surreal, there was something undeniable. He wasn't feeding me a line. He wasn't trying to charm me with rehearsed sweetness. He was just telling me the truth. In that moment, surrounded by a sea of glittering gowns and polished shoes, it didn't feel like I was standing in a crowded ballroom. It felt like it was just us, suspended in time, speaking a language no one else could hear. And deep inside, I realized I was starting to believe him. I don't know how long that song lasted. Maybe 3 minutes, maybe forever. All I know is that when the music finally faded, I didn't want to let go. I expected him to release my hand, to step back politely and thank me for indulging him. That would have been the natural ending. But he didn't move. Instead, he kept his hand resting lightly at my waist, his other hand still wrapped around mine, as if he wasn't ready to let the moment slip away either. I glanced up at him, searching his expression, and what I found there made my chest tighten. He wasn't distracted, wasn't looking past me or toward the cameras flashing in the corner. His focus was still locked on me, as though the world outside our little circle didn't exist. The orchestra flowed into another melody, and without hesitation, he guided me right into the next dance. My breath caught again, but this time I didn't resist. My body had already adjusted to the rhythm of his, and moving with him felt natural, almost effortless. Around us, I could feel the shift in the room. Whispers were rising, hushed but unmistakable. I caught glimpses of women watching us, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, envy, maybe even disbelief. Why me? Why the plain girl in a simple black dress when he could have chosen anyone else? The thought flickered through my mind, but it didn't stay long because his voice pulled me back. Ignore them, he murmured. They don't matter. And the strange thing was, when he said it, I believed him. The weight of all those eyes didn't seem so heavy anymore. It was as if his presence shielded me, making the noise of the room blur into something distant, unimportant. We talked as we danced, nothing earth-shattering, little fragments of conversation about music, about how he secretly hated these formal events, about how I hadn't danced in years. Yet with every word, I felt myself drawn deeper into something I couldn't quite explain. It wasn't just attraction, though that was there too, pulsing quietly beneath the surface. It was connection, something warm and steady, as if our souls had recognized each other in that crowded room. At one point, he leaned in just slightly, close enough that I could feel the brush of his breath. You know, he said softly, I could stay like this all night. My heart skipped, and I knew he meant it. There was no performance in his tone, no attempt at charm for the sake of impressing. It was simply the truth, spoken as naturally as a sigh. And hearing it made me realize something that shook me to my core. I didn't want the night to end either. Somewhere between one song and the next, between nervous laughter and steady steps, something undeniable had begun to bloom, a spark. And no matter how I tried to reason with myself, I knew I was powerless to put it out. When the music finally stopped, reality crept back in like a draft through an open window. The spell we'd been under seemed to hover in the air for a moment before slowly breaking. People clapped politely, and couples began drifting back toward their tables, their conversations picking up as though nothing unusual had happened. But something unusual had happened, at least for me. I pulled in a breath, ready to thank him quickly and retreat before my nerves caught up with me. I expected him to let go of my hand, to give me a charming smile, and move on to the next social duty that awaited him. That was the script I'd written in my head, except he didn't follow it. His hand lingered around mine, his thumb brushing lightly against my skin, as if reluctant to let go. Come with me, he said softly, not as a command, but as an invitation. I hesitated, my eyes darting toward the exit, then to the glittering crowd, then back to him. Where? Somewhere quieter, he replied, his smile carrying a warmth that felt out of place in such a polished room. Just for a moment, and before I could talk myself out of it, I nodded. He led me away from the dance floor, weaving through the clusters of people until we slipped into a side corridor. The music grew faint behind us, replaced by the hush of marble halls and the muffled echo of our footsteps. It felt strange, being away from the noise, almost like we'd stepped into a different world entirely. We stopped near a tall window, the city lights glittering outside like fallen stars. He finally released my hand, but only so he could turn toward me fully, his gaze steady, searching. You don't realize how rare you are, do you? He asked quietly. The question caught me off guard. I gave a nervous laugh, shaking my head. Rare? I'm not sure that's the word I'd use. Out of place, maybe. Awkward, definitely. But rare? He leaned a little closer, his expression so earnest it almost stole my breath. You're not trying to impress anyone. You're not playing a part. That's rare in my world. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I'd never thought of myself as someone remarkable. Ordinary, yes. Invisible, sometimes. But rare? That was a word reserved for people with brilliance, beauty, or power. And yet here he was, a man who had all of those things, looking at me like I was the one worth noticing. I lowered my gaze, my voice softer than I intended. I don't know why you chose me. He paused, then said simply, because when I saw you, I couldn't not choose you. The words hung between us, heavy and electric. My heart pounded in my chest, and I realized this wasn't just about a dance anymore. Something had begun, something I hadn't expected, and I wasn't sure I was ready for it. But ready or not, it was here.